All right, so now we are going to discuss swallowing reflex. Okay, now this is one of the introductory part of your different types of movements of GI tract. Okay, now listen, swallowing reflex starts from your mouth. Okay, clear? Now listen with all your attention. Before we start this swallowing reflex, I would recommend you to go to that video where we have discussed in details muscle contraction and relaxation. That means muscle stretch reflex. Okay, because the first part of this swallowing reflex is actually chewing or mastication. Okay, is chewing or mastication. Okay, now listen with all your attention. Whenever we are talking about mastication, the first thing we need to understand is this: mastication in general is actually made up, mastication in general is actually controlled by 4 main types of muscle, and they are muscles used in closing jaws. Second, muscles used in opening jaws. Okay, now listen. Now there are actually 3 muscles which are mainly used in closing our jaw. Okay, now listen. If you just close your mouth, do one exercise with me. If you close your mouth and if you do like this, okay, you are touching one muscle and you are doing this, right? Then you can sense that one muscle is contracting continuously, right? If you are chewing something, right? Now the muscle which you are seeing here, this muscle, okay, this muscle is called masseter. This muscle is called masseter. Okay, this is masseter. Okay, masseter. Clear? This is your masseter muscle. Now touch here, okay, and chew again using your mouth closed. Then also you can see some contractions here. Now the muscles which you were actually touching is called temporalis. Why? Because they are attached to the temporal bone. Okay, temporalis. Clear? Okay, and the third muscle which is used while closing the jaw is actually called medial pterygoid. Is called medial pterygoid. Let me write it with a different color because there is a reason for it. Is called medial pterygoid. Okay, now listen. What is the basic difference between this medial pterygoid? Actually, there are lateral pterygoids and medial pterygoids. Okay, now listen. The basic difference between masseter temporalis and this pterygoid muscle is this: that you cannot feel the pterygoid. Okay, why? Because these pterygoid muscles are deep inside the masseter. Okay, these pterygoid muscles are actually deep inside the masseter. Therefore, you cannot feel it. Clear? That means, suppose this is your masseter. Okay, deep down there is what? Medial pterygoid. Okay, Now, there is only one muscle, which is used for opening the jaws. There is only one muscle which is used for opening the jaw, and that is called lateral pterygoid. Okay, that is called lateral pterygoid. Again, like medial pterygoid, you cannot also fill the lateral pterygoids. Clear? Now listen. So these are the four. So these are the four muscles which are used for opening and closing of jaws. Okay? Clear? Now listen with all your attention possible on this earth. Okay? Now the first thing you need to understand right now is this, that while chewing, a reflex arc is actually working. Now what is that? Now listen. If I will have to draw this skull, then I can draw like this. For the time being, understand that this is your skull. Okay? For the time being. Now listen with all your attention. You know which muscle is present here? Which muscle is present here? This is your what? This is your temporalis. Okay? This is your temporalis. Okay? This is your what? Temporalis. Which is this? Okay? This is your temporalis muscle. Okay? Now, what is what is this? Masseter. Masseter is present here. Okay? Masseter is present here. Clear? This is your masseter. This is your lateral pterygoids, which is present beneath the masseter, and this is your medial pterygoids. Okay? Clear? Now listen with all your attention. This is your epicondyle. This structure, this thing is your epicondyle, right? Right? This is your epicondyle region. Now listen with all your attention. What happens is this. Epicondyle is this notch-like region. Now listen. What happens is this. It must look like a good skeleton. Okay? It must look like a scary one. Now listen. What happens is this. During, mastication or during chewing, what happens is that during chewing, a reflex inhibition actually takes place. A reflex inhibition actually takes place. Now, what is that? You must understand right now. Now, for a quick recap, we must understand this very basic thing. I am not going into details. Better you go for that video where I have discussed in details. Now, this is what? A muscle. Now, a muscle has main two types of fibers, right? Right? What? Okay? Now listen. This is what? This is the sensory receptor, right? This is the sensory receptor. Now, when this is stretched, you remember? When this is stretched, what happens is this. It excites alpha motor neuron, and alpha motor neuron excites this. Now listen with all your attention. What is this? Extrafusal fiber. This is intrafusal fiber, right? Now intrafusal fibers are what? Muscle fibers, but they act like stretch receptors, right? Now, before the proper contraction of a muscle, these stretch receptors should be stretched first, so that so that action potentials can travel through this pathway, right? And then through alpha motor neuron, these extrafusal fibers can contract, and the contraction of extrafusal fiber causes actually the what? Contraction of this muscle fiber as a whole, right? Now listen with all your attention. The most important thing you need to understand is this. Suppose this is your suppose you know masseter or something like this. Suppose this is a masseter muscle, okay? Now before chewing, before you can chew like this, okay, the first thing we need to understand is this: before generation of tension, there should be what? There should be activation of these what? Intrafusal fibers, because they are stretch receptors. Now listen, intrafusal fibers are only excited when they are stretched, right? Now listen, therefore if you want to work with masseter, what will happen is this: you will have to at first stretch this masseter muscle. You will have to stretch this masseter muscle, right? Now to stretch this masseter muscle, by stretching this masseter muscle, what is happening here is this: these intrafusal fibers are stretched, and therefore volley of action potentials are now coming up to the nerve root, and therefore what is happening is alpha motor neuron is getting excited, and then this muscle is contracting, and therefore chewing process starts. Clear? That means what happens is this, that during chewing, reflex inhibition of those muscles occur which help in closure of jaws. Reflex inhibition of those muscles occur which helps in closure of jaws. That means what? Whenever reflex inhibition of those muscles are occurring which helps in closure of jaws, that leads actually to the action of chewing, okay? Then what happens is this: glossopharyngeal nerves and facial nerves actually do their job. Suppose this is your tongue. Your tongue movements is controlled by which nerve? Your tongue movement is controlled by glossopharyngeal nerve, and therefore glossopharyngeal nerve does its job. And now listen, the taste buds of your tongue, the first 2/3 of your tongue, the taste buds of first 2/3 of your tongue is controlled by facial nerve. Okay, is controlled by facial nerve, and the last 1/3 is controlled by glossopharyngeal nerve. Clear? You now know these things. Now listen, that means the movement of tongue is controlled by what? Glossopharyngeal nerve and hypoglossal nerve. Sorry, yes, that is actually not glossopharyngeal, that should be hypoglossal nerve. Sorry, hypoglossal nerve. Okay, and the taste of the last 1/3, the last 1/3 taste buds is supplied by glossopharyngeal nerve. Okay, the movement of tongue is actually occurring because of hypoglossal nerve, right? Now what is the most important significance of mastication? The most important significance of mastication is this: that mastication is the process by which solid food materials are converted into a round shaped bolus. Solid food materials are converted into a round shaped bolus. Okay. Now, the most important part we are now going to deal with is that how this bolus enters our esophagus. Okay. That means how this bolus leads to the activation of esophageal muscles so that swallowing can occur. Okay. The act of swallowing is divisible into 3 main phases. Okay. Number 1, oral phase. Number 2, pharyngeal phase. Number 3, esophageal phase. Okay. Oral phase, pharyngeal phase and esophageal phase. Now, let us first try to draw a diagram. This is what? Tongue. Okay. Now listen with all your attention. Now listen. What I have drawn is, this is what? This is called hard palate. This is called hard palate. Okay. Now, if you don't know what is hard palate, just do one thing. Okay, let me complete this now. Just do one thing. Open your mouth and try to touch the roof of your tongue. Okay. You are hitting somewhere, right? That is your hard palate. Now, this is what? This is called soft palate. This is called soft palate. Now, if you don't know what is soft palate, just go backward with the help of your tongue and then you will see some muscular portions. Okay? Then what is that? Go back to your, go back with the help of your tongue to your posterior part aspect of your mouth. Then you will understand that you are reaching a muscular area. Touch the roof obviously. Then you are reaching a muscular area, right? That is what? That is nothing but your soft palate. Okay, this is your soft palate. Now listen with all your attention. What happens is this actually, that when food bolus enters, then what happens is this food bolus is pressed. This food bolus is pressed under your hard palate and tongue. Okay. Now listen. Whenever food enters this particular position, then only oral phase starts. Okay. Then only your oral phase starts. Okay. Clear? Then only your oral phase starts. Now this is your food bolus. Okay, let me draw the food bolus with another color so that you can understand well. Because okay. Now listen. Now the first thing you need to understand is this, that your tongue is actually, what it is doing is, your tongue is actually pressing this food against this hard palate so that this whole thing becomes round shaped and becomes a bolus like thing, so that it becomes easier for us to swallow it. Clear? So this is your food bolus right now. Okay. Now what happens is this, it will move posteriorly like this. Okay. Now a very important thing is happening here which you should understand, and that is this. Okay. Clear? Okay. Now listen, what I am drawing is, now listen with all your attention. Looks odd, this person has odd, brainstem and odd everything. Now what happens is this food bolus is now entering posteriorly. Okay. Food bolus is now entering posterior aspects. Now listen, what is happening here is this. Now this food bolus now has two ways to go. Either it can go here or it can go and slip here. And sometimes, you know, your food particles may come out of your nose if you're laughing or something like that, if you're drinking or something like that. This is because this soft palate actually has not closed. Now listen, what happens during swallowing is this, that this soft palate actually closes so that this food cannot enter this area. Okay? Now, they have only one way to go, that is this space, right? Now, there is a trick here. You know what is the trick? You know, the trick is very, very important for you to understand. The first trick you need to understand is this, that we have a very delicate situation here. That is, we have this thing here, which is what? You know this? What is this? This is your trachea. That means if you continue like this, then you will reach your lungs. Clear? Now, this is what? This is your trachea, and here is your what? Here is your vocal cords. Okay? Here are your beautiful vocal cords, okay, which is used for phonation. Actually, these are your vocal cords, okay? These are your vocal cords. When, you know, when air comes out of this thin space, then these muscles of vocal cords, you know, become tense and loose so that you can, you know, raise your voice or something like that, okay? Now listen with all your attention. What is this? What is this? Actually, these are your vocal cords, okay? These are your vocal cords. Now, what is this? This is what? Epiglottis. Epiglottis. Right? This is epiglottis. Now, listen. What happens is, this is very important for you people to understand. Understand the mechanism first. Now, what happens is this, that when this food bolus now tries to enter here, now a very important point here we need to understand is this, that suppose, now listen with all your attention. Suppose this is me standing like this. Now this is what? Anterior triangle of the neck. Okay. Now touch your anterior triangle of the neck. Okay. And try to swallow. Then you will understand your anterior triangle of the neck is going up. That means now what is happening here is this, that there is some mechanism which when you are trying to, you know, swallow this food bolus, what is happening here is this, when you are trying to, you know, take a bolus inside your, you know, what? This is your esophagus, right? This is your esophagus, okay? Food pipe, and this is your windpipe. Now listen, whenever you are trying to, you know, take in a food bolus using your food pipe, windpipe, food pipe again, I'm really sorry. Using your food pipe, what happens is this whole thing, this whole arrangement of vocal cords and all these things, epiglottis, actually moves forward, moves like this. They moves like this towards the tongue, okay? Now, which muscle is actually doing? Now listen, there are many muscles involved here. Now the most important thing you need to understand is this, there is a bone here, which is called hyoid bone, okay? Now there is your hyoid bone, okay? Now this hyoid bone is connected to, you know, many hyoid muscles, okay? There are many muscles here which are connected to, you know, this whole arrangement. Now when tongue actually, you know, moves the bolus inside, then what happens? This hyoid bone becomes, you know, comes towards the tongue, and with the help of this muscle, this whole thing actually moves this-ward. This whole arrangement moves this-ward. Now listen what happens. Now very important point is happening here. Now the food bolus will move here, right? Now this is, now listen, this whole arrangement is moving. This whole arrangement is moving here in this direction, and the food bolus is moving in this direction. That means what? This epiglottis will automatically close with the help of this bolus, right? So beautiful, right? Now this epiglottis will actually close with the help of this bolus when it will hit this, you know, epiglottis. That means within a fraction of a second, this whole epiglottis will close, and this food bolus will be entering through your esophagus, okay? Through your esophagus. Clear? Okay? So now listen, this is called this whole thing which I have explained is called pharyngeal phase of your swallowing. Now, very important point here we need to understand is this, that this soft palate closes because there are nerves which sends input to swallowing center in the medulla, and efferents come with the help of vagus nerve, that is cranial nerve 10, and glossopharyngeal is cranial nerve number 9. Okay, clear? Okay, now listen. Okay, so soft palate contracts to move upward, because of which nerve? The sensory part is glossopharyngeal, that is 9, and the efferent is number 10, that is vagus. Okay, clear? Okay, so this is your pharyngeal phase. Now we will be talking about esophageal phase. Okay, now we will be talking about the esophageal phase. Okay, that means suppose this is your trachea, and this is your suppose esophagus. Okay, this is your suppose esophagus. Okay, now this esophagus leads to what? What is this? Stomach, right? Stomach. Now listen with all your attention. A very important point here we need to understand is this. A very important point you need to understand here is this, that the entry points and exit points of esophagus is guided by specialized arrangement of muscles which is called sphincters. Now listen, this is called upper esophageal sphincter, that is upper esophageal sphincter. Okay, and this is called lower esophageal sphincter. This is called upper esophageal sphincter and this is called lower esophageal sphincter. Okay, clear? Now a very important point here we need to understand again is this. So this is what? This is your esophagus, right? This is your esophagus. Now the first very important thing we need to understand and we need to remember it for our entire life, that is, I will be rubbing the entrance of trachea right now. Now listen, there is an important part here we need to understand. The first 1/3 of esophagus, the first 1/3 of esophagus esophagus is made of, very important, is made of skeletal muscle. Now you must understand this. It is made up of skeletal muscle. The 1/3 of esophagus is made up of skeletal muscles. Okay, the 1/3 of esophagus is made up of skeletal muscle, and the rest of the esophagus rest of the esophagus is made of smooth muscle. Understand this very carefully. 1/3 of the esophagus behaves, that means 1/3 of the esophagus behaves differently, and the 2/3 of the esophagus, remaining esophagus, behaves differently. That's a very important point you need to understand. Another thing, the upper esophageal sphincter is actually, some author says that it's a mixture of both skeletal as well as smooth muscle, but some author says it's a purely skeletal muscle. So we will go with, it is a skeletal plus smooth muscle, okay, to avoid any controversy. But this lower esophageal sphincter is purely made up of smooth muscle. Clear? It's purely made up of smooth muscle. Okay? Now listen with all your attention. So this is what? This is what? Why I am drawing like this, you know? Because they are like springs. They are like springs. They can expand and contract. Okay? This is what? Lower esophageal sphincter, right? Now listen with all your attention. What happens is this, that, okay, let me draw like this, okay? Let me draw like this. Suppose this is the first 1/3, right? It is made up of what? Skeletal muscle, right? Therefore, up to this. Now listen. Suppose food bolus has entered here. Suppose food bolus is now entering here. Okay, let me draw the food bolus with another color so that you can understand. Okay, suppose the food bolus is actually entering here. Now, what happens is this: when food bolus is entering, this area, then the spring will relax. And will let this food bolus enter here. Clear? Clear? That means whenever food bolus is entering the esophagus, then what happens is this, you must understand here. Then what happens is this spring relaxes. Okay, this spring relaxes. This is what? This spring is actually not a spring. This is what? Upper esophageal sphincter, right? Now this upper esophageal sphincter relaxes. This upper esophageal sphincter, when relaxes, food bolus now enters. Now listen, with the entry of this food bolus, what happens is this, peristalsis starts. Now, what is peristalsis, right? Now listen, peristalsis is actually a combination of two things. It's a combination of vagal nerve, vagal efferents, and it's also a combination of myenteric plexus. If you don't know what is myenteric plexus, please do watch the first part. Okay, I am telling to you as well and those who are watching this video. If you don't understand what is myenteric plexus, then go and watch the first part of the video. In the enteric nervous system, we have discussed in detail what is myenteric and Meissner's plexus. Okay, now listen. Now this is actually under the control of vagus. This sphincter is under the control of vagus and myenteric plexus. Sorry, this is under the control of vagus. But when food enters, then you know what? Peristalsis start. Now, what is the law of peristalsis? Suppose here is your food particle. Present. Okay. Now, the portion where food particle is present should contract, and the portion where food particles will go, they will relax, right? They are contracting. The place from where the food particle has come, they will contract, and the place where the food particles will go, they will relax, right? Why this is happening, we already know, because of enteric nervous system, myenteric plexuses. Okay. Now again, by the help of this alternate contraction and relaxation, this food particle or this bolus actually will enter here, right? Again the same thing will happen. this portion will now contract, right? This portion will now contract. We already know how this thing occurs. This portion will now contract, okay, and this portion will now relax. Sorry. This portion will now relax, okay. This portion will now relax. Again, when it will come here, again the same thing. This portion will relax and this portion will contract, okay. Therefore, this alternating wave of contraction and relaxation will occur, right? Now, this is actually called primary peristalsis. This is called primary peristalsis. This is called primary peristalsis. Clear? This is called primary peristalsis. Very important point we need to understand here is this, that this primary peristalsis is the first, pressure wave. Is the first pressure wave. Now listen, if after primary peristalsis, that means if after this food has entered the stomach, okay, now how it enters the stomach we will discuss later, okay, in this lecture. After it has entered the stomach, okay, now if some food particles are present, okay, if some food particles are left here and there, then the second wave of peristalsis will occur, which is called secondary peristalsis. After first or primary peristaltic wave, a secondary peristaltic, wave will hit, okay. Clear? Clear? After this first primary peristalsis, wave, this secondary peristaltic wave will hit, and the remaining food will go and into the stomach. Now, in some persons, what happens is this upper esophageal sphincter stops working. Clear? This upper esophageal sphincter stops working. Now, the first important thing we need to understand is this: when upper esophageal sphincter stops working, then food cannot enter this, esophagus. Problem is called dysphagia. This problem is called dysphagia. Dysphagia means difficulty in swallowing, okay. Now, what happens in another case, what happens is this, that this particular, lower esophageal sphincter, LES, is under the control of neurons, which secrete vasoactive intestinal peptide, okay, which is one of the, inhibitory neurotransmitter, and also nitric oxide. Now, what happens is this, that due to many reasons, these neurons may stop working. In many persons, these neurons may stop working, and due to that, what happens is this LES or lower esophageal sphincter may not relax properly. Therefore, they will remain contract. In that case, this food will not enter the stomach, and if it enters, then it will be, with, great difficulty. Therefore, what happens is this, in case of this scenario where the inhibitory neurotransmitter releasing neurons are lost, which is controlling the, relaxation of this particular lower esophageal sphincter, this disease is called achalasia. Achalasia. Clear? Now what happens is this, in some persons, what happens is this, whenever food enters the stomach, then this lower esophageal sphincter should relax, should contract, right? So that this particular valve contracts, and this particular, food contents which have entered the stomach should not go back to the esophagus, right? Because it is, churned up in acid, right? Now, in many persons, what happens is this, that these neurons may overfire, or those neurons which actually help in contraction of lower esophageal sphincter, these are lost, okay. Therefore, foods may enter the esophagus. Now, whenever this occurs, this is called gastric esophageal reflux disease, or GERD. Now, up till now we have discussed two diseases, that is GERD and achalasia, okay. Now, important point here we need to understand is this, that both GERD and achalasia are actually problems arising due to lower esophageal sphincter. Now in GERD, lower esophageal sphincter fails to contract after food enters stomach. Okay. Now in achalasia, LES fails to relax when food wants to enter stomach. We will discuss in details achalasia and specifically GERD. I know many things about GERD because I am a patient of GERD. Okay, I have GERD, gastric esophageal reflux disease. Okay, now we will be discussing in details GERD as well as achalasia and all other things when we will be talking about the pathology and pathophysiology of gastrointestinal disorders. Okay, so now we will be talking about the motility of stomach. Clear?